these are my, sort of what I've written out as what are the components of a parenting plan. What must be in a parenting plan with a lot of details. So let me just go through that with you so you have that. So one is communication, and that includes how, fax, mail, email, telephone, meetings. Frequency, how often. Remember I had the weekly transition email. The response time. The transition emails we already covered, and emergencies. So we kind of referenced those things today, but they're all written down as the things to remember. Then we've got transitions, which includes pickup and drop-off, days and times, location, rules for parent behavior at transitions. Here comes the faking it part, right? Here comes the part where I say, you need to be cordial to each other, and you need to at least be able to say, hello, John, goodbye, Sonia. You have to at least be able to say that. Well, she'll just call her lawyer and say I was abusive. And so I say, let's try it. And if that does happen, then you'll tape those things. But your children are seeing no communication. It's like they don't matter. You can't even say hello to each other. So it generally works. It generally works because people say, I can't even look at her, and I say, fake it. And so we're talking about parenting time and changes, which includes days, hours. What about illness? If a child is sick, what about canceling? A contact. How do you reschedule? How do you swap days or whatever? And what about some families have the right of first refusal? Do you know what that is? Right of first refusal is if I'm out of town during my parenting time, I first offer the child to the other parent. And if they can't take care of the child, then I go elsewhere. So are you going to do that or not? Under what conditions? Then we have holidays, special days, and vacations. And it includes religious holidays, school vacations, summer vacations. What happens to the usual schedule when holidays interfere? And how do you get back on the usual rotation, which usually means nobody has 2 weekends in a row. Birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, I don't know if you have that here. Then we're looking at, you're having trouble seeing around this?
No, it's just small.
I know, it's very small. It's a Word document. Extracurricular activities, do both parents agree? Rules for what happens when you're both at an event, or can you both be at an event? Clothing and equipment, rules around clothing, washing, and returning. So for example, you'll get the complaints that she brought the soccer uniform to me dirty, or he returns all the clothes dirty. Those kind of things, so you have to have rules about that. Rules for lost and missing items. The day-to-day decisions, like who schedules the medical and dental appointments. Is the other person notified of the schedule? When? Who attends? How is information shared? Scheduling and attendance at parent-teacher meetings. Sharing of school information, etc. Major decisions about health, education, and religion. Travel decisions about communication rules for taking the child out of town, out of the country. who holds the passports, general parenting things like shared routines regarding homework, communication regarding homework, agreements, if any, about discipline between homes, keeping the children out of the middle, all of that. And then, should the parenting plan ever be reviewed? And if so, how and when? So those are all the things that can go into a parenting plan. And what I don't even have in here, or I used to have it in here, is things like haircuts, tattoos. So haircuts become a big issue. You know, he cut her hair and it looks horrible. Or it might be, I want to take him here for a haircut. Well, no, I want to take him here for a haircut. Okay, so we have an agreement where one person does haircuts for 6 months, then the other parent does haircuts, is responsible for haircuts for 6 months. But all of these things become huge battles, right? So the point is to take the battle out of it, so it's all right there. You're filling up all the holes, all the places where there can be conflict. All right, so we're going to go down to, we're going to go to here. Right? I think this was the vote. Interviewing. So, first of all, we have to know enough about child development to know how to interview a kid. Because interviewing a 3 or a 4-year-old is really different, of course, than interviewing an adolescent. So, let's just, for a moment, go over these developmental periods as a review. And it's short, but it's a good review. So toddlers, as we know, are very egocentric. And they're basically going to use language. Do you know what egocentric? Yeah. They're basically going to use language to say what they want. And as they get older, to gain approval, even when they're little. You know, you clap for a 1-year-old, and that just really excites them. But their memories are not sequential. Their memories are like a detail, a fragment, and usually sensory. So their memories are usually of things that are like a smell or a sound, a siren, the smell of fire, those kinds of things. That's what a toddler can convey, because that's how their memory works. So interviewing a toddler is really difficult because they can't really say what they want. The only way I see a toddler is, as Annika said, with a parent, with each parent. And basically I'm just looking at the attunement. How attuned is the parent to the child? And how much does the child go to the parent for comfort, soothing, etc.? Here's a toddler. A day is a long time. I wish. So preschoolers is when you're going to really start to think about, talking to a preschooler. But one of the things about preschoolers is they have magical thinking, right? And their magical thinking means that they don't really see the world so accurately. Because that's why they're into superheroes. You know what I mean by superheroes? Like Superman or whatever. I don't even know who the current superheroes are. But like when my son was a preschooler, thought he was a pirate. And a pirate, actually. A pirate. And he dressed like a pirate, and he always, he stood like swaggering like a pirate. He thought a pirate would. And when it was time for lunch, I learned because I said, it's lunchtime, and he came to the table and he said, this is not what pirates eat. And so the next day I preempted that by saying, I made you peanut butter and jelly because that's what the pirates eat. So then it was okay. But he was so into the fantasy, he's okay now. He's 28. But he was so into the fantasy that he really, he had this magical thinking that he was this serious pirate. The other thing about preschoolers is because of their egocentrism, they think that the way they explain things that they can't understand, if they can't see it, is physical causation. So they will attribute an effect by a cause that they can see or experience themselves. So for example, a parent leaves home and their belief is their parent left home because they threw a toy against the wall. It's their fault because they're temporally connected in time. Through the toy, all of a sudden my father's gone, right? So that's something we have to be attentive to and think about. Now, between the ages of 4 and 6, they begin to understand another point of view. And what I mean by that is they understand they're so separate and different from mommy or daddy or whoever that mommy or daddy think differently than I do. That doesn't happen until they're 4, 5, 6 years old on a good day. Their memory is more sequential, but it's really only for central events. They don't remember details so well. They are more likely to incorporate false suggestions, things they've heard, or into their memory, as if, and sort of change it. If they're told, remember when such and such happened? They are more likely to incorporate that into a memory rather than it not being something that they saw or heard. So, those egocentric preschoolers, Dad, if Mom ever has a boyfriend, I hope he's just like you. That warms every father's heart. So school-age kids, like 6 to 12, they now have concrete operations, so they can think more logically. They understand cause and effect better. They certainly have a better orientation of time. They understand time. They can see other points of view, but just one point of view at a time. They can't hold multiple points of view. Their memory is very detailed and long-term. So they've got good memory, school-age kids do. And of course it gets better every year. And they can sort of figure out what the demands of a situation is. So if you're talking to a preschool kid, they can decide that what you're saying to them is what that they need to say and respond to please you, and that you're really looking for blank kind of answer. Or they can also understand that Mom wants me to say this, or Dad wants me to say that, right? They're always looking to feel better about themselves, to feel competent, to feel mastery over something. From 6 to 9, they're very rule bound. And 9 to 12, they're more idealistic. They can align easily with a parent because they can blame a parent. Sort of in the 6 to 9-year-old age group, they're also just about fairness. They just want things to be fair. Now, adolescence is when you're hopeful. They develop formal operational thinking. They can think more abstractly. They can anticipate the consequences of things. And they can think about a sort of complexity that, well, this is what the rule is, but does that make sense? And who does it make sense for? You know what I mean? They can hold multiple points of view, multiple perspectives. And their job, of course, is to ultimately to separate. To be their own person, have their own identity, and to hold on to the support of their family, but be their own person. That's their job during adolescence. And in case you thought your kid doesn't lie, they all lie, adolescents, and they lie to get what they want. So if you're interviewing a 15-year-old who's got one home that's really permissive and they can do whatever they want, and they have another home where it is strict, more rule-bound, more structured. And what they want is what? What?
The first one.
Yeah, the permissive home. So they're going to lie to get it. So, that's how we have to think about possibly. This is adolescence. The cows. Just ignore him. That's our rebellious young calf, Matthew. He's into wearing leather clothes just for the shock value. Okay, so now how do we integrate children into the parenting coordinator process? So first of all, we think about why. Why would we involve children in the process? Well, for one thing, the focus of the process is on the children, right? Supposedly. And there's a lot of research that suggests that children do better when their voice is heard. And the child's perspective on things, on their family, on the situation, may be different from both of their parents. They may have a very different point of view that could be really valuable for us to learn. And they also can provide some important information for us about their parents that would help us work with their parents. And when we use information from the children in our sessions, after interviewing the child, and we come into the session with some things that their child told us that they want us to tell their parents, it can be incredibly powerful. Now, some reasons not to get children involved is we have to be very clear that just because they're telling us maybe something that they want, it doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. Because what they want may not always be their best interests, right? Their decision-making and judgment is undeveloped because, as you know, with brain development, that the mature brain, the neurons, the back of the brain, which is the limbic system, is kind of in control of things. So it's the seat of impulses, it's the seat of drives, it's the stress response, it is sexual drives, That's the limbic system. And the front of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the seat of judgment, the seat of decision making. So this part of the brain in adolescence is not fully hooked up to this part, which is why adolescents sometimes take bad risks, sometimes use poor judgment, and aren't always effective or able. Their decision-making muscles aren't formed so much. So when, one thing we have to think about is that their judgment and their decision-making is not fully developed. What age do you think the brain is supposed to be fully developed on a good day?
25.
25, yes. Another reason is that if you have a child who's really aligned with one parent, then the information that you get is really skewed and can be actually more harmful to the process. The school-age kids want to be fair, so everything they kind of present is in the service of being fair. They may be fearful of hurting or rupturing a relationship with a parent, and they may fear being punished by a parent. So those are things we have to consider. So we have to figure out what is developmentally appropriate about how we're going to interview a child. And we have to figure out whether, what's the process going to be and what the guidelines are. And that I'm going to cover that. So part of what we want to figure out is things about the parents. So one is the level of empathy the parent has for the child. If we present information to the parents, are they going to hear it? Are they going to understand it? And not even a willingness to honor their feelings and needs, but to hear them and to understand those are real, coming from that child at that time. Are the parents able to give their child permission to really talk to you? Are the parents able to be flexible and take another point of view and incorporate the child's feelings and wishes into their thinking and understanding of the child? Not into decisions necessarily, but into their thinking and understanding of the child. And are they able to hear opinions that are different from their own? So we need to think about that with parents. We need to think about with children, can they express themselves? How loyal are they to one of their parents? Do they have some unresolved anger at a parent that's going to kind of skew their point of view? Do they feel like they're responsible for their child and for their parent, and that whatever they say is filtered through that feeling of responsibility or obligation? And are they fearful about information being shared with a parent? So we're thinking about, how's the parent going to react? What's going on with the child, and how will they be able, is this good for them to be able to voice their opinion? Now, there are many situations that benefit from getting the child's input, like small changes in the residential schedule, just small kind of changes, like the case that, let's see, which case? Well, I'll give you a case. So for example, I had a situation where all the boy wanted was to be able to, on Thursday evenings, have his father take him to his bring him home from hockey practice because his father was the hockey coach. And the mother refused because it was her time. So, and the child was really, presented that to me in a very compelling kind of way. So I wanted to hear from the child whether it was important and how important and why. And I would then present that with the boy's permission to the parents as part of the discussion. Just a small thing, but it was important in this particular case because there had been a battle about it for so long. There might be we want to hear about them in terms of their activities, their travel wishes, whether they want to change schools or not, whether this special event was so important that it would, yes, I want to go to my mother's wedding, even though it's on my father's time. That kind of thing. Sometimes it's important to hear those things from the child. So not just in the beginning meeting the child, but at different times during not that we're relying on the child's voice all the way through, but there are times when it becomes clear that it's important to hear from the child. And sometimes parents will ask you to talk to the child. And if both parents want you to, you need to evaluate that and figure out if that really is the right thing to do or not. And if that information is going to contribute to the discussion. So when we interview a child, it's not only important to get the information, but also to sort of interpret it. And what I mean by interpreting it is we have to sort of understand how competent is this child to give us this information or to talk to us. And is this child's functioning such that they can provide information or that they won't feel stressed by it? And given that it's such a high conflict divorce, how voluntary is this? Or is this child so aligned with or so possibly coached by one parent that that's going to be a problem? So to begin an interview with a child, I need to do some preparation with the parent. And I first ask, what are you going to tell this child about why they're coming to see me? And then they say, what? And then I say, you might want to say something like, we've been seeing Robin for a while to help us make the best decisions that we can, because she helps us really think about that. And your mom and I, your dad and I think it's a good idea for her to meet you because a lot of what we talk about is about you. And we want you to be able to share with her whatever you want. And you should feel free to do that. And I'm not going to question you afterwards about what you said. So I kind of script it for both parents because I'm, of course, often worried about what they're going to say. So the way the child interview process begins is when the child comes in, I ask the child, do you know who I am? What did your parents tell you about why you're coming to see you? And what we're going to do today is I just want to find out how things are going for you and whether there are things that you'd really like to be different or to change. And what you and I talk about is really going to be between the two of us. But I'd like to be able to share things with your parents, but only if you give me permission to do that. So when we're finished with this meeting, I'm going to ask you what I can share and if there's anything I can't share. And then we'll talk about that. So I lay that, those are sort of the limits of confidentiality of the meeting. So first, of course, it's just rapport building. So what grade are you in? What are the things you like to do? Do you have any pets? Those kind of questions. And then who else is living with you at mom's? And who else is living at your house with dad? And, just those kind of rapport building questions. And then, I don't do this so much, then I will go to, how do you tend to work out problems that you may have with each parent? And, how do your parents sort of hear you? How does that work for you? And is there anything you wish would be different? And do you have any specific things you want me to tell your parents or to work on with your parents? Or, so I get then into that. And if there's something specific, I will say something like, your mom and dad aren't sure if you should go with your cousin for the month to Belgium or whatever it is. And I was wondering what you thought about it. What would be the hard parts? What would be the fun parts? What would you be looking forward to? If you didn't do that, what would you do instead? Are there any things you're worried about if you went? So I would ask if there's a specific issue, I'd ask those kinds of questions about it. Oh, here we are with back to rapport building. So always I want to use open-ended questions. Tell me about your school. Tell me something you like to do for fun. Tell me about your summer plans. Well, your mom, and then you go to more direct questions. Your mom and dad weren't sure if going to Belgium was for the month with your cousin was the best thing for you. Tell me more about what you think about that. So open-ended questions as much as possible, followed by more focused questions. All right. So the summary of this is you try to figure out whether you can use the child's input. You decide on how you're going to do that. You're aware of the pros and cons. You're aware of your ability to interview children of different ages. You want to make sure the child doesn't feel pulled or pressured. And then you want to review all the rules of confidentiality with the child. Now, when you begin the interview, especially if it's a younger child, you want to make sure that the child understands your questions and that you understand their answers. You may need to modify your language in some way. The other thing is, in understanding their language, is kinship terms may be different from different cultures. So you have to know who, in fact, the child is talking about. Now, one of the things that's really clear is when there are problems in an interview, it may be our problem. It may be that we've used poor techniques, that we have used leading questions, that it may be that we've used language that the child can't understand. It may be that we didn't understand what they were saying but thought we did and didn't check it out. It may be that we don't really have much experience or understanding of child development. It may be that we're telling the child what it is we want them to say. So we have to be really aware of our issues. Now, let me just give you a little bit about that in terms of the research, and I'm just going to give you a little bit. So, we have to think about suggestibility and memory. So there really are two forms of suggestibility. One is when an actual memory has been altered. So, for example, the child has a memory of an event, but what he or she hears afterwards leads to an alteration of that. And that kind of suggestibility is completely unconscious. The child has no idea that it occurred. So, for example, I had a child who witnessed her uncle throwing her brother against the wall. And there was actually a police report about that. So I knew what actually happened. But her father, and it was his brother who threw the child against the wall, the father kept telling the child that she didn't really see that because she was outside at the time that it happened. And she came to believe that. She came to believe that that was what had happened and that her memory of it was what other people had told her. It wasn't a real memory. So that was a completely unconscious kind of process that went on. And sometimes, though, it just merely kind of embellishes information that the child already has in their memory. Now, distortions or alterations of memory can also occur by asking children misleading questions. So if you ask a child a question that contains false information and present a different account of the event to them, that would be a way. Now, the second form of suggestibility is really unrelated to memory, and it concerns the degree to which the reporting of events can be influenced by social, psychological factors. So the child may conform to a suggestion because the child's anxious to please what they perceive to be the authority figure. They may feel pressured to conform to an adult's suggestion or simply trust the information. Now, what age range do you think that would occur in? Definitely under 7. Definitely under 7 that would occur. More than older kids. So over time, if there's sort of this mental rehearsal of false statements or of that can actually rewrite the child's memory. It's been rewritten and is the new memory. Younger children are more suggestible than older children. But again, there are those situational and personality factors that can alter a memory. This, I think, is kind of important for us to know. Younger children may not have the cognitive skills that are necessary to accurately answer questions about time, date, location, and numbers. The first questions kids learn are who, what, and where questions, and who they learn by 4. Who, what, and where questions. So they're the easiest questions to use with young children. But remember, kids have a real time orientation by age 7. So when questions require an understanding of time. So if you ask a 5-year-old when, first of all, they're not going to know an hour. They're not going to know a day. They may know night, it was breakfast or lunch, it was dark, it was light, it was bedtime, it's when I got up, it's when we were in Norway. They could say that, but they can't say, well, it was last Tuesday at about 4. They can't give us that. And why questions mean that you have to have an understanding of causality. And remember, that comes with concrete operations. So why questions don't work. So in terms of questioning, you start with open-ended questions, then you narrow or focus according to the response when you need clarification or details. But then you go to more open-ended prompts like, tell me more. Or tell me who was there. Or that kind of thing, right? Thoughts and questions about this kind of thing?
When you're talking to a child, and it's the child says that it's okay that you tell the parents, and then maybe that wasn't okay.
With the child?
Yeah. How do you deal? Because when you're talking with the child, maybe it says it's okay in that
To
time.
please me.
Yeah, or maybe in that time it thinks, but it doesn't have a consequence here. Something. How do you deal?
And of course, a child. That's a really good question because a child can't anticipate consequences until 12, 13, 14, right? So if you're talking to an 8, 9-year-old and they say you can tell my parent everything, they can't anticipate the consequences. If I'm worried about something a child has told me, I myself am worried, I'm going to go back. And I'm going to say, now you told me this. I'm wondering, if your parents hear this, what might they think? What might happen? Okay, good. So I've got to be really careful about that so I'm not leading them to say, oh no, don't tell them, but because they're trying to please me. But I want to share whatever information I can, and if I feel like that's going to result in harm to the child, I'll go back over it, or I will just make the decision not to share it myself. But I've had kids say, I don't want you to share this part, and I thought it was really important to share. And I've said, I'm wondering if I do share this, what might happen? And then they'll say, my dad will get mad or something like that. I'm going to respect that. I'll say, okay, and I won't share that. But if it's a younger child who says, go ahead, share it, they probably know everything anyway because kids still think their parents kind of are in their ear. Then if I'm fearful that it will cause harm, I won't share it. But I'll question again about it without being too leading.
And if you don't share, do you tell the child that you will not share?
No. Well, I might. It depends on the situation. I am not going to say, I'm not going to share this with your parents because I'm worried that your mother will whatever. I'm not going to give the child that explanation. That's my interpretation and my sort of adult view of it. But, so I'm not going to share, I'm not going to tell them that. What I will say is, well, your mom and dad and I meet every few weeks, and one of the times I'll share these things with them. So then they don't feel like they're not going to feel like I betrayed them by not sharing it. I feel like that's the best I can do in that situation. It's not a perfect situation. Other thoughts, questions? Well, I suggest we stop for today. We have a lot to cover tomorrow, and I'm really hoping that some of you will think of other cases or pieces of cases that you want to share. I've made an arrangement with Dan that if people are worried about confidentiality issues when sharing a case, even though it's easy to change the names and so forth, there may be too much identifying information to have it on a tape. He's not going to take those. It'll be your decision whether it should be taped, it's okay to be taped or not, okay? So I hope I'm going to see you all tomorrow. And what we're definitely going to talk about is sort of really concretely how to use the research to educate parents, alienation, and if you want, stuff about domestic violence. All right. Thank you.